conditioning expert. He works with UL football. Also has an interest in going to grad school in allied health. So he's going to be sitting in today, and I'll toss it over to him. You know, a lot of times I give you an athletic training perspective of some things, but I think it's kind of cool having a strength and conditioning perspective to say, well, you know, in we do this a lot, or we find that this works, just to kind of give you some added practical knowledge when we talk about these muscles and function. All right, guys, this is traditionally the most difficult muscle that we are going to learn. And the only reason they call it the midway muscle, but I like to think of it as kind of like a spy, because you know you think about a spy working both sides, being able to play both sides, right? And that's what this muscle does. And we have others in the body like it, but to me, this is the one that's very obvious to see, and it kind of sets the precedent for other midway muscles. Basically, it's a muscle that can switch function based off of your joint position. And I gave you one for the lower extremity with the piriformis stretch, right? Like in anatomical, the piriformis is an abductor external rotator. But if you flex enough, you could actually make that muscle become an internal rotator, because when you're at here, it has this oblique angle. But if I flex my hip, well, now there's no obliquity there. It's just straight away. So if I keep flexing, well, now the obliquity actually switches function. Okay? So the brachioradialis is a muscle that runs from the brachial part of your arm, crosses the elbow, and runs over to your radiostyloid process. And the radiostyloid, when they have these things and I come in, they hide my stuff everywhere. I have to run around and try to find it. So your radiostyloid is right here at the distal part of your radius. This muscle does not cross your wrist. It gets close. It gets close, but it doesn't cross your wrist. So you see that little blue dot right there? That's where the brachioradialis is pulling. So you have a muscle that starts on the brachial part of your arm, and it crosses the elbow and goes into this radiostyloid. So when your elbow is flexed, you can see how this muscle would be trying to pull in a direction of pronation to line up the radiostyloid with the brachial part of your arm. It has obliquity. It's like an oblique. A fancy word I would call is, you know, obliquity, things that have angles to it, like are spirals. So I like to say it has spirality when you're in a supinated position, because it's trying to pronate you, but it's not trying to pronate you all the way, because the muscle starts in the middle of the arm. It's only trying to pronate you to midway, because once you get to midway, there's no obliquity. It's almost like at midway, it becomes erectus, like a straight shooting muscle. It literally is like in anatomical, it's like an oblique, but when you rotate it, it becomes erectus. It becomes just straight in a midway position. If I had a little string, you'd see how the string just goes straight across. So from anatomical to semi-prone. You remember in 310 we talked about a semi-prone position. It's a functional position grip that we use a lot. And in 310 I also taught you that semi-prone is called semi-prone because anatomical position is supine. So the only way to get there is to have pronation. If anatomical position was fully prone, we'd call this a semi-supinated. So that's why it's called semi-prone. Okay? We are going to refer, I just think it makes it simpler, anatomical or supine, because you can't go any further, to semi-prone. We're going to call that quadrant 1. You think about a graph, and right down the middle, and you have like this side of the graph. Remember when we did the trig, right? We had like quadrant 1, and then we had quadrant 2 for the Cartesian plane. So from anatomical to semi-prone, we're going to call that quadrant 1. Any position that your radial ulnar joint is in quadrant 1, the brachioradialis is a pronation puller. I didn't say it was working. It pulls in a direction of pronation, but only up till semi-prone, because from here I can't push, muscles can't push. So once it pulls, think of it like this. If I had a string attached to this lightsaber and all it could do was pull up, once I get the lightsaber lined up, I can't push it down. Does that make sense? All I could do is pull it, and then once it's lined up, I can't, the only thing I can do is pull it up. So for the brachioradialis, once you're semi-prone, all it can do is just continue to try to flex your elbow. It can't try to pronate you anymore because you've lost all its obliquity. You've lost all its angle. Now, from semi-prone, so look, from here to straight shot, no obliquity. If I continue to pronate, well, now I create more obliquity. I spiral it around the forefinger, and now it has an angle to it. But this angle is trying to unwrap my radioulnar joint. Again, trying to bring it to midway. Midway is semi-prone. We're going to call this quadrant 2. From semi-prone to fully prone, we're going to call that quadrant 2, just like our Cartesian plane. Quadrant 1. Now, remember, this is, I'm using this bone, this radioulnar joint, because that's what I got. If I would use a right, quadrant 1 would be from anatomical to semi-prone, quadrant 2, so, but it's a mirror of each other. So in quadrant 2, semi-prone to fully prone, the brachioradialis is trying to unwrap the radioulnar joint, but only to midway. So the brachioradialis can be a supination puller or a supinator if you're in quadrant 2, if you're anywhere from midway to fully prone. It could be a supination puller. It could be a supinator. It can swap function. I gave you, although I didn't say I was going to ask it on the test because I didn't think we were there yet, but I taught you how the rectus abdominis. In anatomical, it's all straight. There's no obliquity. But if I twist to the right, it wants to pull me back to the left. And if I twist to the left, it wants to pull me back to the right. Having a muscle that can switch function is great for our body's movement, especially all the, I say damage, but when we get to the end of range of motion, that's when bad things can happen. So having this big, powerful muscle that can help me stop here and help me stop there is great. Having a muscle that can switch function and help me put on the brakes here and help me put on the brakes there, it's a good thing. So let's look at the brachioradialis as an elbow flexor, all right, no problem. Elbow flexion puller. Where are my athletic trainers at? All right, I don't think they're in class today. But there was a, sometimes this can be confusing for athletic trainers, and some of you that are going to be therapists. There's a reflex test for the brachioradialis. It's an illusion because you're looking at the thumb whip, but it's not because that muscle crosses the wrist. It's because when you hit that muscle and you do the reflex test, it flexes your elbow, and then your fingers kind of pop like a towel, like they just kind of go along for it. It's like inertia. So they're looking for the thumb, but in reality, it's just the inertia of your fingers in your hand after your elbow flexes because you hit that reflex test. See, I saved that one just for my athletic trainers, and they're working today. It's all right. All right, check this out. Radioulnar joint supinator to midway. Do you see how it spirals around the forearm? So this would actually be in quadrant 2 for this example. Makes sense? Like you're past semi-prone. So it would be a supinator in quadrant 2. It would be an unwrapper in quadrant 2, an unwrap puller in quadrant 2. And then in quadrant 1, anatomical to semi-prone, it would be a pronation puller. It would be a pronator. That's your PowerPoints. Here is your I'll try to have some views, visual views of the brachioradialis. Brachioradialis. So this would be semi-prone. So again, it's not wrapped or unwrapped. It's sort of like laying on your side. There's no obliquity to it. In anatomical position, it's trying to pull it across to line up with where it crosses the elbow. That's why it'd be a pronation puller. And we're going to do some examples with it as an agonist. All right. Your circles or your lists, if you notice, if you look at your circles or your list, you're going to notice that the brachioradialis is a pronator. The reason it's a pronator is because in anatomical position, you're not semi-prone, right? In anatomical position, you're supinated. So that muscle is a pronation puller based off of your anatomical position. So that's why it's listed as a pronator in your circle, because all of our circles are referenced anatomical. You have to know whether that's make a note of it. I think I tried to put a note in your notes, right? Where, hey, if you're past prone, if you're past semi-prone, that muscle now switches its function and wants to pull you back to midway. It becomes a supinator past semi-prone. Here's how I want you guys to learn how to apply the brachioradialis as an agonist. We're going to do the same thing we've been doing this whole time. Identify the agonist. What's the external force trying to do? What's the exercise? What's the machine trying to do? And you're going to have some all the time pronators and all the time supinators. Doesn't matter your radial joint position. Your pronator teres and your pronator quadratus, 24 hours and on holidays and weekends. Your biceps brachii, your supinator, 24 hours and on holidays and weekends. The brachioradialis depends what agonist you need and what quadrant you're in. So, in this example, I'm holding the hammer or the exercise, the dumbbell, and I'm in this quadrant. I'm in quadrant 1. It's a mirror of each other, right? I'm in quadrant 1. External force is trying to supinate me. I need pronators. You need to say, oh, I have some all the time pronators. I have some no questions about it all the time, holidays and weekends pronators, pronator teres, pronator quadratus. Thank you guys so much for having your direction of pull in your name. Wish they all would. But then you got to play the game of, is the brachioradialis a pronator in quadrant 1? And the answer is yes. So in this position, my brachioradialis says, hey guys, I can help pull in the direction of pronation when I'm here. Does that make sense? In other words, if I'm recruiting pronators and I'm in quadrant 1, brachioradialis says I could come out to play. If I need supinators and I'm in quadrant 1, like if the external force is trying to pronate me now, and I need supinators in quadrant 1, supinator muscles like, I'm in. Biceps brachii like, I'm in. Brachioradialis says, guys, I can't do anything. I can't push you. I can't push you down. Brachioradialis is like, I can only pull in a direction of pronation when I'm in quadrant 1. I got to sit this one out. So in other words, even though I'm in quadrant 1, in this example, I don't need pronators. In this example, the external force is trying to pronate me, so I would need supinators. Who are my supinators? The supinator, biceps brachii, and the brachioradialis is like, I wish I could, but I can't push in this quadrant. Does that make sense? So in other words, it's not about, if I'm in quadrant 1, I'm always going to need this muscle. If I'm in quadrant 2, I'm always going to need this muscle. No, if you're in quadrant 1 and you need pronators, brachioradialis is like, I'll volunteer as tribute. If you're in quadrant 2 and you need supinators, brachioradialis is like, I volunteer as tribute. But if you're in quadrant 1 and you need supinators, brachioradialis is like, I got nothing for you. I don't pull that way. And if you're in quadrant 2 and you need pronators, brachioradialis is like, oh, I wish I could do something, but all I can do is this. I can't do that. Make sense? So I think it comes down to just identifying your agonist, identifying your all the times, and then a secondary question is, can the brachioradialis do something for me? If you need pronators in quadrant 1, absolutely. If you need supinators in quadrant 2, absolutely. But if you need supinators in quadrant 1, nope. And if you need pronators in quadrant 2, nope. Watch this. We're going to do agonistic group. I need pronators, 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 supinators, 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 supinators. Supinators, 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 pronators, 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 pronators. You get it? I need pronators, concentric, pronators, concentric, pronators, concentric, pronators, concentric, supinators, eccentric, supinators, eccentric, supinators, eccentric, supinators, eccentric. Supinators, concentric, supinators, concentric, supinators, concentric, supinators, concentric, pronators, eccentric, pronators, eccentric, pronators, eccentric, pronators, eccentric. I need brachioradialis, concentric, brachioradialis, concentric, brachioradialis, concentric, brachioradialis, eccentric, brachioradialis, eccentric, brachioradialis, eccentric, brachioradialis, concentric, brachioradialis, eccentric. Make sense? It's a lot of syllables. So, A to B, external forces trying to supinate me. I need pronators. I observe pronation. It's going to be pronators through concentric. I'm going to have all the time pronators, teres, and quadratus. Can my brachioradialis offer any help? Yes. Because I need pronators in quadrant 1. Once I get to here, the brachioradialis is like, all I can do is flexion pull. But when I go from here to there, now gravity's trying to pronate me. I need supinators. Make sense? Supinators through eccentric from here to there. I'm going to have my all the time supinators, the supinator, my biceps brachii, and the brachioradialis is like, dude, I can also help. I can be a supinator in quadrant 2. Come back, supinators concentric, supinator, biceps brachii, brachioradialis. Here to there, pronators, eccentric, quadrant 1, brachioradialis. Does that make sense? If the brachioradialis, think of it like this, guys. If you know that a curl is working your bicep, your brachialis, your brachioradialis, okay? If you know that my elbow flexors can be responsible for flexion concentrically, then that means it's impossible for my flexors to be responsible for extension concentrically. They can do it eccentrically, but they can't do it concentrically. If you know that your flexors can do extension eccentrically, that means the extensors can't do extension concentrically. You know this. So all we're doing is we're applying it to the radial ulnar joint. If you know that the brachioradialis can be a pronator concentrically, what that means is it cannot be a supinator concentrically. And if you know that the brachioradialis can be a supinator concentrically to midway, that means it can't be a pronator concentrically from midway. It's the same concept, just applied in a new area, new place. Any questions about that before we get into radial ulnar joint position and curls? Hunter, what is the different variations that you guys use? I mean, I don't know. I'm going to assume that you guys don't say, you know what, we need to really work is radial ulnar joint, brachioradial. But I'm sure that, curls and stuff is a part of any strength and conditioning. Is there a preferred position that you guys use, or is it variable, or does it not matter in the strength and conditioning world?
For curls,
Mm-hmm.
it depends on what you're trying to work with.
Okay.
So, like me doing, like not scientifically, I know the main thing I always think of is, drag.
This doesn't have to be a scientific conversation. Uh-huh.
But then if you're talking forearm, you can obviously turn your hands over,
Uh-huh.
and that's gonna start working this right
Yeah.
here.
But is there any particular one you guys favor? Or do you try to mix it up? Or like when you're designing programs for your athletes, what goes into deciding which kind of things you use?
If it's a beginner, obviously just start supinated.
Start with the base. Gotcha.
If you think someone, like my strength coach told me, you need to start doing more with your forearms and your girls.
Uh-huh.
Start at it. If you, I don't really know the complete size behind it, but if you just want like more thickness.
Uh-huh. Yeah. What about different sports? Do different sports get different treatment in terms of what types of curls they do, or it's kind of general for all sports?
Not necessarily.
Mhm.
I know like in gymnastics, they'll do instead of curls, they'll do pull-ups.
Uh-huh.
Because it's something they always do, and it
Yeah.
works the same muscle.
Yeah.
Like you see gymnastics, they have the huge biceps.
Yeah.
They don't just line curls up.
Yeah.
Doing this.
Yeah, they get a lot of work naturally in their sport. Awesome. So there's a lot of for those of you that aren't aware, there's a lot of different variations in doing work in your elbow flexors and your elbow extensors, right? What I'm going to do today is talk about a couple of whys those positions matter, targeting different things, and it's not because of length tension. It's because of neurological recruitment, because you don't want unwanted secondary function. What I mean by that is elbow and radial ulna have several muscles that influence both. Right? So if we go to our circle, we could just see right away the brachioradialis is a flexor, and it can be a pronator or a supinator depending on your position. The biceps brachii, flexor and a supinator. So transverse plane, it's a heck of a lot easier. I'm just using layman's terms. A merry-go-round full of kids might weigh 2,000 pounds. I can't lift it up, but I could spin it. I could spin all that weight because it's rotational. I can have 100-pound dumbbells in my hands, and you know what I'm not going to do? Make them go up, but I can spin them. Doesn't take a lot of force to rotate something because you're not moving the center of mass. Okay? So what I need you, or one way I want you to think about this is when you have a single arm curl, like in a with a single arm dumbbell, you have muscles that are not just pulling in a direction of elbow flexion, but you also have some muscles that are trying to pronate and or maybe supinate you. Doink, doink, doink. Okay. Think of it like this. In a fully supinated position, anatomical position, okay, our three main elbow flexors. Brachialis, tugging on the ulna. Doesn't worry about radial ulnar joint motion at all. It can pull all it wants, and you won't spin the merry-go-round. Biceps brachii, though, is a supinator. It's a merry-go-round puller. So if you're fully pronated and you recruit flexors, what's to stop that biceps brachii from spinning that merry-go-round while you're also pulling the elbow up? Does that make sense? There's a secondary function at the radial ulnar joint, and that function doesn't take a lot of force to make something happen. In a fully supinated position, the biceps brachii no longer has to worry about spinning the merry-go-round. The merry-go-round is, it's like there's a stop gap at the door. It's preventing the door. When you're fully supinated, that biceps brachii can yank all it needs. You're at the end of your rope. So you could recruit that muscle as much as you want. There's no unwanted secondary function. However, your brachioradialis has an unwanted secondary function because in anatomical position, it could also pronate you while it's trying to flex you. She's cool. All right. Does everybody understand that for radial ulnar joint pronation and supination, unless you have like a heavy weight that's trying to do this, when you're holding something in the center of mass, it doesn't take a lot of force to make it spin, okay? So the point is, when you're in a fully pronated position and you're doing curls, yes, you have a limiting factor of your finger flexors, and yes, you have a limiting factor of your wrist extensors. Meaning, when you're supinated, the handle isn't going to pass through your palm. But it could pass through your fingers. There's some distraction there. But in addition, if I'm doing pronated curls with my dumbbells and I recruit my bicep too much, it wants to create supination while it's also creating flexion. And if I don't want that, if I want to stay prone, I actually have to lessen the innervation of my bicep. I'm purposefully not recruiting so much bicep if I don't want what the bicep does. Like Chris Rock has a great bit when he talked about that the white tiger attacking Siegfried and Roy or something. And he's like, and they say that tiger went crazy. That tiger didn't go crazy. That tiger went tiger. The bicep only knows when I get shocked, I pull. And if it's pulling in a direction of elbow flexion and supination, and you don't want that supination function, then you're going to say, hey, dude, don't pull as much because I want to stay prone. So if the bicep isn't pulling as much because you don't want to have that extra supination function, something's got to make up for that work. In addition, in a fully pronated position, your brachioradialis wants to supinate you. So in other words, 2 of your 3 major flexors in a fully prone position also want to supinate you. So if you're going to lessen the recruitment of the brachioradialis because it's also a supinator and your biceps brachii, who's left that can really just absolutely yank as much as you want and not have to worry about secondary radial ulnar joint function? The brachialis. Brachialis is like, dude, you could give me all the methamphetamine you want. I'd yank as much as you want. I'm not going to try to supinate you. Probably the first time you've ever heard a methamphetamine joke. Does that make sense? So it's not about link tension. It's about literally purposefully not recruiting flexor supinators because you want to stay pronated. In a semi-prone position, now the brachioradialis is like, sweet, I no longer have a secondary unwanted function. I can now yank as much as I want, and now all I'm yanking is in a direction of flexion. Brachialis is like, dude, where you been? But now the brachialis has some help. That's why a semi-prone position might work more of your brachioradialis because it doesn't have any secondary unwanted radial ulnar joint function. But the biceps brachii is still a supinator in this position. So again, if you're doing hammer curls It's not that your bicep is off. It's just your bicep is limited in how much it can pull before it does this. Make sense? When you're fully supinated, now the bicep's like, finally, I'm not on roller skates. I can yank as much as I want, and I'm not going to have any secondary unwanted radial ulnar joint function. So that's the secret to the radial ulnar joint position. It's that your major flexors have secondary radial ulnar joint function that you have to neutralize. So in other words, when you're doing curls in a pronated or semi-prone position, your pronator teres and quadratus are working to neutralize the biceps brachii and brachioradialis. But obviously your biceps brachii is a heck of a lot more powerful than your pronator teres and your quadratus. Here's a fun, there's no science behind it. This would be a fun experiment. If you're doing barbell curls and your hands stay neutral, then it's going to produce the same thing. But if you're trying to curl and literally try to bend the bar, in theory, you could recruit more biceps brachii in that position. Because now the bar is preventing unwanted secondary function at the radial ulnar joint. Does that make sense? So like if you try to lift it up and try to bend it, your biceps brachii is like, ooh, I can pull harder because I have something preventing the supination from happening. It's kind of cool. You do some EMG stuff on that to see if you can get more brachioradialis recruitment when you're trying to flex and supinate. But the bar is going to prevent, the bar itself is going to prevent it from happening. All right, Campbell, what are you going to ask us on the test? Let's start with the brachioradialis. I think that fair questions could be any of this kind of stuff. An agonist and a contraction. And I'm going to toss in brachioradialis. So if you need a pronator, if you need the pronators in quadrant 1, brachioradialis is like awesome. I pull that way. If you need a supinator and you're in quadrant 2, brachioradialis is awesome. I pull that way. The brachioradialis does not pull in either pronation or supination when you are midway, because again, it has no angle, it has no obliqueness here. It can be a flexion pull, but it can't push you into wrapping or unwrapping. So I think a fair question is, would the brachioradialis assist from A, B, B, C, different examples. So in other words, on the test, I might say A to B, eccentric contraction of the supinator and brachioradialis, eccentric contraction of just the supinator, concentric contraction of the supinator. Do you see what I'm saying? Like I'll give you an all the time, and then I'll also give you an all the time with the brachioradialis to see if you remember, oh, in that quadrant, and with this agonist, the brachioradialis can help. Clear as mud? Hunter, what kind of injuries, whether it's acute or chronic, you guys see a lot in upper extremity lifts in the weight room? It may not be any, but is there any kind of like tennis elbow kind of pain or any kind of, or is that kind of rare with now with you guys teaching them technique, and good technique? What's the most common kind of upper extremity discomfort that you might see in the weight room? Shoulder?
See a lot of just forward. That's mostly
from bad technique. A quick story that I want to set up more feedback from you. When I think it's one of the reasons I try to champion strength and conditioning in female sports. So I work women's volleyball in college, I work women's softball in college, and a lot of our players, and I guess it could be guys too, but a lot of our players didn't have access to strength and conditioning. And so when they came in to Southern Miss at the time, they were, I mean, they were starting from scratch, especially some of these Olympic lifts and stuff. So I'm setting you up for this question. Do you guys have like a basics of lifting boot camp? Awesome. Tell everybody about what y'all do.
For freshmen or any line transfer, usually at the beginning of the spring for transfers, then definitely summer. We have multiple lift groups, probably 3 or 4. The first one's the KNES, and they do the lifts, but with lightweight.
So technique.
All the coaches are spread out, watching everybody. Obviously, make sure none of it is dangerous. But like that's mostly for Olympic lifts. They mostly focus on like split jerk, snatch, power length. Those are the biggest things you ever do.
So you can't assume, well, you can, I don't mean to assume, you can't assume that just because someone transfers from another college or something that they're ready to roll, right? Or, you kind of have to, like, it's almost like doing a swim test before you let them, go play or swim, right? So y'all do this for all incoming, whether it's freshmen or transfers, just to make sure that their technique is sound. Awesome.
They for transfers, they notice that they know what they're doing, but then they get put in another group
Mm.
to start with. So obviously they're sure old enough, they know what they're doing, they can do it in another group. But the freshmen almost always stay in that group this summer.
I've always tried to champion strength and conditioning specialists, coaches as an allied health profession. Because if you think about it, consult your physician before beginning physical activity, right? So you're telling me it's important. In addition, you have to communicate with the athletic trainers for certain things and indirectly through the doctors with other things. What is that relationship like, when someone has a shoulder problem or someone's coming off of an injury, or what's the relationship between a strength and conditioning coach and the medical side in terms of their list?
Yeah, make sure it's known. Sometimes the player can go to a trainer, but the strength coach never knows. So that's a relationship they need to have. Like someone gets hurt, trainer knows, he needs to go tell the strength coach. And then once that gets translated over to the strength coach, you have to kind of change the workout plan for that guy every day. So say if one guy hurt his shoulder, he's not going to be doing shoulder press. He can do single arm, maybe right away on the side. I broke my wrist a few years back, so instead of doing back squat, I did one of those safety bar squats. So I just hold it right here. So obviously on my wrist having everything pulled, just changing everything up on.
And what Hunter just said is ergonomics. Like, not necessarily like in a work setting trying to make things safer, but figuring out ways to make it practical. Like, you got to figure some of this stuff out sometimes to still get you lift in or still get you work in. Is there a difference that you found within the gender sports of what kind of injuries tend to pop up? Lower extremity, upper extremity, or I don't know if you have some experience with the women's sports, but is there kind of a difference in kind of soft tissue or injuries that you see in the weight room?
I don't really ever see women having upper extremity unless it's a freak out, something like that or something. But like if they go to a training room to get treatments, usually groins, hamstring stuff. That's when football players especially, I see a lot of pectoral, back. Like you can go in a training room anytime and see someone in their back cup or something. Nice.
Do the strength and conditioning coaches have regular meetings with the medical staff, or it's as needed? So like in the morning, the athletic trainers may say, here's an update on so and so, this sport, that sport, or is it individual strength and conditioning coaches with specific athletic trainers assigned to those sports? How does that kind of work for communication?
So for football, our school specifically, they have staff meetings every morning.
Every morning.
With the whole football staff, the trainers, the nutrition, strength coaches. Once he gets through his trainer's part, he goes through injury report.
Wow.
As he's going through injury report, strength coaches write that down. This guy's hurt, he hurt this. What can we do today to make sure he's not doing anything with that muscle?
Yeah.
So
You know, it's anecdotal. In other words, I have no data other than life data. Rarely, rarely, I can't even remember a time where so-and-so athlete is missing a game because of an injury in the weight. Like, think about that. Like, how often have you ever heard like Joe Burrow has to miss 3 games because of one of my when I was at Southern Miss in the athletic training room, our head trainer was worked with the Falcons, and he said we do not mess around with he's like, nobody is going to get it. Well, nobody, you can never say never, but just my point is that they take that very, very seriously. And that's why I think probably the main thing to prevent injury is good mechanics, good technique, good form. Not doing, I forgot what comedian said this, but not doing crap you don't know how to do. Right. Doing stuff you feel comfortable in doing. And also, I think it's important. You guys probably have eyes on that weight room at all times. So, does anybody have any questions before does anybody have any interest in doing strength and conditioning stuff, whether it's a full-time job or even on the side, or working at a gym or a CrossFit place, or it's a very shy class. It's a very shy class.
Can I say something?
Please, please, absolutely, whatever you want.
So you told us about obviously saying concepts.
Uh-huh.
If I was about to take this test, I think the one calculator would write it down on my notes. But I don't have middle pictures. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't have middle pictures. The only contraction I can ever have is eccentric.
100% at the radiology point.
It's the simplest thing to say for me.
No, it's very logical. So Hunter's point is that from the radial joint, I just want to make sure nobody's, well, what about this? That's elbow, right? We're just talking about radial joint. From this position, now slow and controlled, right? Eccentric. I could be like, but that would defeat the purpose of the exercise, maintaining tension. So to Hunter's point, it's concentric, but once you're here, the only way to go down in this rehab exercise is eccentric lowering. Absolutely. But again, that's the fun with Campbell, that even though you're 100% here, I can create an environment where from here, I can now supply an external force. So what if I had a TheraBand now, right, trying to supinate me, and I need pronators against the TheraBand? So although Hunter is 100% correct in this exercise, absolutely. But that doesn't mean I can't create an exercise where you're in this position and there's not something trying to make you do this, so therefore you can go concentric from there. But in this specific example, absolutely. It's got to be eccentric either way. Good insight. How long ago you took 310 and 415? A year and a half, maybe?
At least over.
All right, guys. You have a good one. I hope today was useful.